So in the last lecture, we cached our app.js file. Still, we're not fetching it when loading this page in offline mode. The reason for this is that we do cache it, but when fetching it and when listening to fetch events, we just respond with, well, another fetch event, which of course requires the network. So if we want to retrieve the item from the cache, we have to alter that code. And we can do so now. So in the fetch event listener of the service worker, let's make sure we actually fetch the data from our cache if available. To do that, I'll go into the respond with function here. And there I want to return caches, and caches refers to the overall cache storage. That's important. Here we too have caches and cache. Caches, as I just said, is the overall cache storage. It allows us to open a subcache, and it also allows us to call match, to have a look at all our subcaches and see if we find a given resource there. So we match a request here, event request. Why a request? Because keep in mind, requests are your keys. Even though we call cache add here, this behind the scenes reaches out to a server, gets the data, and stores this request response key value pair in your cache. So the key always is a request object, never a string. So therefore here we see if we find a given request in any of our subcaches in the cache storage of that given page here. And if we do so, we can continue. So this then block will give us back the response if we found this request or not. Important, even if we don't find it, this will be executed. We get the response here, and the response will simply be null if we don't have that request in our cache. That's important because you could think that you catch any error where you don't get a fitting entry in the cache, but it's actually not an error, it's just a null response. So you always use then. And in then we can now simply check if we do have a valid response or not. So we can say if response, so if this is not null, then we want to return the response. So now we're returning the value from the cache. We're not making a network request. This is important. We're intercepting the request and we're not issuing a new one. Instead, we're just having a look at what we wanted to request and we see if it's in the cache. And if it is, we return it from there. However, if we don't find it in the request, then we want to return the fetch request where we reach out or where we simply continue with the original request. So we return fetch event request. So this now allows us to continue with the network request if we want to get something which is not cached, but get it from the cache, well, if it is in there. So let's save this and let's go back to our application. Make sure to disable offline mode so that we are online and reload. And as always, under application, you'll see that the new service worker is waiting to get activated. For now, I'll skip waiting and reload my application here again. So now let's go back to network or stick on application and tick offline here and reload. Now, if you go to the network tab, you see a lot of requests are sent. The interesting request is the app.js file though. Here, you see that? It's fetched from service worker. Now, we see that for all these files here, because they're all funneled through our fetch listener, but you see that in the end, all these files are fetched from the internet then here, because they have file sizes attached to them. But one file is missing here, the app.js file, because that never made it to the internet. That request never made it to the internet. It's catched in the service worker, and then it's returned from there too. So that's super important to keep in mind or to understand. We are fetching app.js directly from the service worker here now. We're not making a HTTP request. Still, our app wouldn't work offline though, because fetching the app.js file isn't enough, and we don't even get to the point where we want to fetch it because we didn't cache the index.html file. So the network tab is pretty empty here because the first important fetch of the local host itself, so of the HTML file itself, already fails here. So this is something we'll fix in the next videos when we finally start pre-caching our entire app shell.